Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a CBSN political contributor and a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. So, Caitlin, the NATO Secretary General actually asked the President of the United States yesterday by reminding him that, in fact, NATO had been a partner in fighting al-Qaeda for 16 years. In Afghanistan.
Right.
And look, I read this interview that the president gave to the Wall Street Journal, and this is a quote from the president to the journal. The magnitude of everything is so big, and also the decisions are so big. You know, you're talking about life and death. You're not talking about you're going to make a good deal. It's almost as if he's realizing what a lot of presidents have realized, that rhetoric on the campaign trail changes when you're sitting in the Oval Office.
That's exactly right. Presidents evolve is the new word, right, that we saw during the Obama administration, during the presidency, especially when they're kind of thrust into foreign policy issues or other issues that they didn't necessarily campaign on domestically. What's interesting about this, though, is that the NATO lines and also the labeling China as a currency manipulator lines, being tough on China, those are really rallying cries of his campaign rallies. So it's a little bit different to kind of shift as abruptly as he has, but it also comes as he's been meeting with foreign leaders. He spent a lot of time with President Xi. The North Korea situation has come full force in front of him. He is now faced with foreign issues that he didn't necessarily anticipate would come to fruition in this way. He very much campaigned as kind of a domestic president, right? America first, talking about economic issues here at home. And so we're seeing this really interesting evolution. And I've talked to Republican lawmakers after the Syria strike who noted that they thought that the president has started to learn some things on the job. And they took it as a positive sign that he's listening to the national security advisors around him, listening to people who have this kind of experience and taking it to heart. So that's one way to look at it.
Caitlin, the president took to Twitter this morning and reiterated his threat to China. If they don't take care of North Korea, then the U.S. and its allies will. How do you see this playing out?
Well, this is really interesting because, again, Donald Trump talked really tough on China during the campaign. Now the alliance between himself and the Chinese president is changing a little bit. He needs China to be a key partner in this, given North Korea's advances. And so they had these meetings at Mar-a-Lago. They've been talking on the phone frequently. And we heard him yesterday kind of talk about the way in which that has kind of changed a little bit. It's really interesting that he backed away from his pledge to label China as a currency manipulator because he campaigned on it.
He made that pledge with the American people, right?
Exactly.
He had a document that he signed.
Exactly. He campaigned vigorously on that. You can go back to the tape. You can go back to the Twitter account to find it. But I'm wondering kind of whether this is a way for him to get China on board as it pertains to this new alliance that he kind of has to form on specific national security issues.
So there will be many people who will be happy that the president is evolving, and that's something that some folks will welcome. But what about those voters who say, look, there are these issues that I strongly supported, that the president was championing, and now he's less than 100 days into office, is already backtracking on them. What happens to those folks?
Right. That's really interesting. So Donald Trump can kind of frame this, if he can message this. Remember, he is very much the marketer in chief on this. If he can say, look, I have to do these things to protect national security issues here at home, I think that could really resonate with people. But yes, he campaigned as the America first, not getting involved in things. He talked a lot about, as it pertains to NATO, they need to pay their fair share. We're tired of funding all these foreign endeavors abroad. What's interesting about the meeting yesterday that he had was that he could say, look, I've put more pressure on them to have these countries pay more. It was kind of odd that he went the terrorism route because that's just not true.
Right.
And so I'm wondering kind of if that will kind of be massaged back into the messaging there. But I do think that his supporters are at this point, waiting to see what happens. And also, he doesn't have many domestic achievements to bring back to them yet. And that's why we're seeing this kind of scramble inside the White House with his top aides.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because with all these foreign policy reversals, what does that tell you? Is Steve Bannon losing his influence?
Well, I'm trying to figure out where Steve Bannon plays a role now that the issues at the forefront of this country have kind of changed a little bit. He campaigned, or he was, for Donald Trump, the economic nationalism, right? very much campaigning, very much getting the president to hone in on these populist issues. And so where is room for him right now? And also, Donald Trump does not have a lot of successes in these first 100 days or so. We're coming up to that mark at the end of April. Does he blame Bannon for that? Is he looking, we know from the president that he's very transactional, looking for wins. We saw that. We're seeing that now. He hasn't really, he can't point to Bannon and say, you delivered this for me. The immigration ban was not a success. It's still being challenged in courts and so forth. So where does he fit into this kind of changing, these kinds of changing issues? So
the other really interesting this Wall Street Journal interview that the president did was fascinating. In that interview, he talked about China's influence, and he said that his position changed over the course of the discussion that he had with President Xi Jinping of China in the course of 10 minutes. What do you make of that? I mean, is that... evolving is one thing, but listening, having a change of ideology, of policy, based on the last person you spoke to, what does that signify? Right, exactly. Especially on some of these issues, they aren't just part of the campaign. I mean, some of these issues on trade, for example, Donald Trump has been talking about for decades, really. So it is pretty striking that he did that about-face so abruptly. But what keeps stinging out to me is last week in the Rose Garden when he said, after the Syria chemical weapons attacks, he used the word, I'm very flexible. And I keep thinking about that word. And we've seen that over the course of the past week and a half, that he has had a lot of flexibility on these major issues. And so that's fine that a lot of people interpret that as, okay, now he's listening to kind of more mainstream advice. But what kind of message does that send abroad, especially at a time when you're trying to really keep these foreign coalitions in place to deal with these issues that are affecting allies? So I think the mixed messages that it's sending, I think, can provide some real challenges. All right, a lot to watch. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks for being here. Thank you.